Good morning and welcome. It is a very good and pleasant day when kindred dwell together in unity, and today we are celebrating a unity that we experience here at First Church with Hope Day School in Freetown, Sierra Leone. And I want to extend a special welcome to the folks from Hope Day School in Sierra Leone. It is good to worship with you today. And so we also extend a special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. My name is Reverend Susan Gibson. I'm the pastor of the First Church here in Farmington, Connecticut. We are located at 75 Main Street in Farmington, Connecticut, and we worship every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We hope you'll join us when we are no longer physical distancing. We also have a special guest today in our worship service. We have storyteller Valerie Tutson. Valerie has inspired and challenged this congregation before, and when she came and told us the story of the enslaved Mende folk and its connection with Farmington and our congregation. Prepare to be inspired again. Valerie's biography is in our church bulletin, which was emailed to you this morning. But allow me to give you some highlights. She's a graduate of Brown University with a self-designed major in storytelling as a communication art. She has a master's in theater and an honorary degree from the Rhode Island College. She has traveled and told her stories worldwide in as far-flung places as South Africa, Jonesboro, Tennessee, and Europe. She's a founding member and director of the Rhode Island Black Storytellers and Fundafest, a celebration of Black storytelling. Valerie has numerous awards for her work using storytelling to foster community, and in the past several years, Valerie has been using her storytelling skills and techniques in businesses interested in creating more diverse, equitable, and inclusive spaces, and to bring communities together. And if you look in this morning's email, you will find a link to the order of worship where you will find a more complete biography. In addition, later in this service, I want you to know that we will be offering prayers. If you have a prayer request that you would like us to include at that time, we invite you to share your request in the comments section on the YouTube feed. If you are a pledging member of this congregation, we encourage you to continue with your pledging in this time of physical distancing. And you can send your check to the church office at 75 Main Street in Farmington, or you can go online to our webpage and click the Give button. And our webpage is firstchurch1652.org. firstchurch1652.org. The flowers this morning are given in loving memory of Andy, the husband, dad, and grandpa of Nancy Barron and her family. He is deeply missed, And we love the flowers, Nancy and family, and we thank you for sharing those with us today. As we continue our Lenten journey of healing, we begin this Sunday remembering the words of Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." As we gather recognizing that we are all of one fabric, that we are all kindred, held in the grace of God. Let us worship God.
Vessels holy and whole, broken, needing the one, open, body and soul, healer come.
We gather together while each of us are in our own individual homes, separated by a virus, national boundaries, an ocean, yet still bound together as the body of Christ. On this table that I stand before, we see the remnants of disparate bottles cast into the sea, and yet look at them now. God gathers us as a beachcomber gathers and marvels at every precious surviving piece of beach glass she finds. We are never alone. We are never lost to the one who seeks humanity's wholeness. This Sunday, as we celebrate our relationship with Hope Day School, we celebrate the power of Jesus to gather us together, to overcome false boundaries, and to bind us together where we receive a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven.
Vessels holy and whole, broken, needing the one, open, body and soul, healer come. Vessels holy and whole, broken, needing the one, open, body and soul, healer come.
As we gather in prayer, let us acknowledge our need to restore, repair, renew the communities of which we are a part. Let us pray. God of all, you created us for each other. You set in us a yearning for companionship and an empathy that binds us together, protecting each other and delighting in one another. Yet, too often we have broken down our relationships instead of building them up. We have been set against one another with the lie of scarcity. We have built systems and economies that widen the gap of resources rather than safeguarding equitable practices. Too many and growing numbers are suffering hardship, food insecurity, joblessness. We cannot fathom the proportions of loss, and so we look away, sometimes even from the need in our own community. Help us, healer. Show us our empathy. Forgive our complacence. Move us to move one step at a time toward greater care for one another. In this silence, we sense and acknowledge our yearning for wholeness.
Their souls holy and whole, broken, needing the one, open, body and soul, healer come.
Know this, love and security is meant for all people, no matter what. We are capable of sharing our light and not running out of enough. Christ's hospitality that broke through false boundaries points the way, for you, for me, for all. God's peace extends beyond our walls to the neighborhood, the wider community, the church, Hope Day School and Freetown, Sierra Leone. And seeing it spread like the rising sun, let it expand to all the world. Let this be our peace. The peace of Christ is with you.
Good morning, school. My name is Lansa Nadine Kabo. Our first reading is taken from Psalms 113, verses 1 to 3. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirt of his garment, as the dew of Ammon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountain of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. There ends my reading.
School. My name is Mariam El Kamara. The second reading is taken from Matthew chapter 8 verse 5 to 13. When Jesus returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer came and pleaded with him, Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain. Jesus said, I will come and heal him. But the officer said, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come into my house. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority over my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slave, do this, they do it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who were following him, he said, I tell you the truth, I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of heaven. But many Israelites, those from whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into utter darkness, where there will be all weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the Roman officer, go back home, because you believe it has happened. And the young servant was healed that same hour. This is the end of my Bible.
Thanks be to God.
Ears of the
One of the special stories of First Church is about the work some of our members did to help in the fight against slavery in the United States during the 1800s. In this time, some of our church members were a part of the Underground Railroad, a network of people who would secretly hide and care for escaped slaves in safe houses and help them on their way to freedom in Canada. They also worked to end slavery in the United States by spreading the word about the horrors of slavery and teach others that people from Africa were just as human as the rest of us. They believed that owning another person was wrong.
Resolved that slavery as it exists in the United States is a sin against God and a violation of the dearest and most precious rights of man.
In one case, the people of First Church and the townspeople of Farmington learned firsthand from victims of the slave trade who came to our town after being freed. The case was called the Amistad. In Africa, men, women, and children were kidnapped from their villages, chained inside a ship like cargo, and taken across the ocean to be sold as slaves. They were treated very badly and suffered during the 2-month journey in the ship. When they arrived, they were sold to work on plantations where they would never see their families in Africa again. On one ship called La Amistad, the captives broke out of their chains and took over the sails. They tried to sail back to Africa, but were tricked and ended up here in Connecticut. They were put in jail until the court decided that they could not be owned, and so they must be set free.
Each of them are natives of Africa and were born free, and ever since have been and still of right are and ought to be free and not slaves.
They were allowed to go home to Africa, but needed to raise money to help pay for their trip home. Some of the members of our church wanted to help, so they invited the newly freed Africans to come and stay in Farmington while they tried to earn money for their trip home. This group of 33 men, 3 girls, and 1 boy arrived in Farmington in March 1841. They came to be called Mende because most of them were from the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone on the west coast of Africa. But they also came from other tribes: Sherbro, Gabandi, Kono, Temne, Bulum, Gola, Loma, Kisi, and Kando. They spoke many different languages between them and began to learn English while they were in jail. When the Mende arrived in Farmington, some of the townspeople were afraid of our guests from Africa. They thought they might be bad people who would hurt their children. But it did not take long for them to see that they were kind people and in many ways just like them. After getting to know them, they felt hurt to think of what these people had suffered, and the thought of them being forced to toil on a plantation was as bad as it happening to their own brother. Women from our church gathered together and sewed new clothes for the Mende. 3 church families took the girls into their homes, including the pastor of our church, Reverend Noah Porter. The men and boy stayed above the store across the street from the church until a church member built a house for them down the street. They were given a plot in the meadows down by the Farmington River where they grew corn, cabbage, beans, and squash on 15 acres of rich farmland. They raised enough to help feed themselves on the voyage back to Africa. By November 1841, they had raised the money they needed and said goodbye to Farmington, arriving safely in Freetown, Sierra Leone, in January 1842. In 1844, 2 years after the Mende returned to Sierra Leone, the state of Connecticut made it illegal to arrest runaway slaves from other states. In 1848, they abolished slavery entirely. The Emancipation Proclamation freed any remaining slaves in the United States in 1863. Dear God, thank you for guiding us to serve others and share our many blessings. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. Let me turn on my mic. Good morning, everyone. See that? Here I am, sort of live, coming to you through YouTube and already making a technical mistake. But I want to say that I am thrilled and honored and humbled to be back in your sanctuary, sharing this beautiful time of remembrance and celebration with you. I want to thank Reverend Susan for inviting me and giving me this space, along with the Sierra Leone Task Force, Ministry Task Force. And I also want to give special shout out to Sarah Jean Willett and Jael Williams for sharing so generously their stories with me today. Sarah has been really gathering the history and the stories of how this church has been connected with Freetown, Sierra Leone over all of these years, and in particular the work with Hope Day School. So last time I was here, I got to tell the story of the Amistad that you just heard. It was one that I knew pretty darn well. And I heard a little bit about Hope Day School, but I still didn't know very much. However, I was asked on this occasion if I would share the story of Hope Day School. Now, I know, just from what I've been hearing, that there are people over there in Freetown who are actually going to Hope Day School now. And there's a good chance that I might have some of the actual facts and dates a little mixed up. I'm a storyteller, not a historian, and you see I put my paper down on purpose. But I do hope that I can share some of the spirit of the place and the joyful, faithful relationship that has been ongoing between First Church here in Farmington and Hope Day School in Freetown. So here is how I will share the story on this day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, ought, 11, 1, 1, 12, 1, 2, 13, 1, 3. Those were the sing-song sounds that came from the very first Hope Day School in the late 1940s and early 1950s. It was located in the home of the woman by the name of Mrs. J.D. Williams, and she had determined that the children in her neighborhood, the Upper East Bombay neighborhood on the east side of Freetown, needed access to an education. It was 1944 when she started the school. World War II was coming to an end, and Sierra Leone at that time was still a colony of the British. And the British prized education. Why, they had government schools, they had primary schools, they had secondary schools, they had institutes of higher learning. In fact, Fora Bay College was a gleaming example of one of the best universities on the entire continent of Africa. Still, you had to be 5 in order to go to one of those schools. And Mrs. Williams recognized that there were plenty of children around her who were not quite old enough to go to school, but who were eager to learn. And not only that, some education, some place, some school would be helpful for their parents. And so she opened up her home, and the children came. And they learned how to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 11, 1, 1, 12, 1, 2. Jael and her brother Victor lived right nearby the school. And though Jael never went, her older brother Victor became a student right there in Mrs. Williams' home. And Jael could hear the lessons from where she sat in her own home, not too far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so the school was started in that place, and children from the area came and went, and Mrs. Williams herself took care of the school and the children for 3 decades, 34 years in fact, until 1997, when she traveled over here to the United States, fell ill, and passed away. And then, what to do with this school, Hope Day School, whose motto was, "Our hope is in God." Well, there was a man of God who lived in the area and who was doing ministry there. His name was the Reverend Canon Carew. And he took over the leadership of that school, and he gathered himself a board of governors, and they made sure that the education was continued for the children in that area. You see, by now, schooling was especially challenging. The country in 77 to 85 was struggling with political upset as the leader of the newly formed African nation held on to power, and it made it very difficult for people to participate in the democratic process, and schools were expensive. They wanted to make sure that this school was accessible to the children in the neighborhood. In 1985, they had to make a change. You see, the building where that very first school was housed on Vinton Street, the property was sold. And so Reverend Canon Carew had to find a new spot for the school. And he found a building, another private home, number 1 Gerber Street. But the facilities were not great. In fact, they were very rough. It was an old timber home made out of wood at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, and it was ramshackle by all descriptions, barely functional, and certainly not a safe space for the now 200 children who crowded in every day to learn their lessons. But Reverend Canon Carew was a faithful man, and he maintained the helm of that school for a good 10 years. And then something happened. Maybe it was God moving in an amazing way. Do you remember I mentioned that little boy by the name of Victor, who happened to be Jael's older brother? Well, he became a principal at Farmington College, that fine institution that I mentioned to you before. And he was from the neighborhood, and Reverend Canon Carew made a connection. And he invited Victor to come and take a look at the school. He had learned that Victor had been a student there. And when Victor came to that ramshackle house on Gerber Street, he was flooded with memories, if you can imagine. He remembered sitting on the floor with Mrs. Williams when he was just a small boy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And he looked at the hopeful faces, the bright eyes of those 200 children who were crowded into this ramshackle building. And he knew something had to change. Because you see, after Victor had left Hope Day School, he'd gone on to primary school and secondary school and university. He'd gone overseas to continue his studies, and he had returned back home to teach in that magnificent university, Farmington College. Reverend Canon Carew said, "Will you help?" And Victor said, I will. He joined the Board of Governors, and the very first thing he did was make connections with the Ministry of Education and make sure that the teachers and the students had the supplies they needed. And then he did the best he could to try to garner support in the community. But by now, 1996, there was war going on in Sierra Leone, and times were very challenging. It wasn't until the war was over in 2001 that Victor was able to come to the United States and make an appeal to the churches and the colleges and universities all over the U.S. talking about post-war Sierra Leone and the needs of institutions like Fora Bay College and Hope Day School and countless others. His story and his call to action came to this very place, this very church, this very sanctuary where I am standing, because Victor's little sister, Jael, had come to this place just about 3 years before. She was a member by now, having been resettled after leaving Freetown in Sierra Leone during the war. And that connection made an opening for the people here in Farmington, Connecticut, to learn more about Sierra Leone in that moment. It also was tied into what they were learning about. At this time in the United States, the Amistad, the movie, had just come out. The United Church of Christ here in Connecticut was working to support the building of a replica of the Amistad. The National UCC was reckoning our part in this part of our nation's history, not just the town's history. And here was an opportunity for this church to engage in its mission and to do the work of Jesus. Our hope is in God was a shared mission. The church people got themselves together and they began to discuss what in the world they could do. There were plans underway to create a new building, renovate an old building, the Porter Building, and they had sold some silver goblets, bringing lots of money into the church for their own building. And as they wrestled with, I don't know if it was a policy or a practice of deep faith, they wondered, if we're going to build something for ourselves, how can we take the resources we have and build something good someplace else? The first couple of people went from this church to Sierra Leone, Marilyn Ostreicher and Jael, and they traveled and they got to see Fora Bay College and they got to see other places, and they saw Hope Day School. And on one of those journeys, when they visited Hope Day School in that ramshackle building, they knew without a doubt that those children deserved to have a good school building. They came back right here to this church and said, we need to help build a new school. And so they did. Yes, they, what am I saying? They, you did. Took your money, $100,000 and $30,000 for solar panels. The agreement was that if they, on Sierra Leone's side, could arrange to buy the land outright, the building would be built. And so this church donated $5,000, and the people in Sierra Leone pitched in the other amount of money that was necessary. The ground was bought, and the plans were made, and the building was begun. And even a drought could not stop the building of Hope Day School, because the children at that time carried water from their own homes to bring to mix with the sand to make the cement to build that school. Wow. All hands, all hearts working together to build Hope Day School. The ministry team had done a fine job and the school was built. And the church committed to continue to support the school, to support the teachers, so that they could have their income. A justice issue, yes. And now, today, Hope Day School is a far cry from preschoolers sitting on the floor in Mrs. Williams' home back in the day. Now a fine primary school which boasts graduates that go on to A-level secondary schools. Why, there are scholarships for students, they have elocution contests, and we heard those words spoken by those beautiful children earlier. Didn't we hear them speak? Yes. Hope is alive and well in this school. And the relationship continues. And it's fascinating to think about this weaving of our worlds and this unity that's been talked about in the service on this day, 2021, as the United States is wrestling again with issues of racial justice and equity and inclusion. You know, that's always been a part of the story of the church's connection with Freetown, Sierra Leone. And even as the church wrestles with what it means to do mission, we can remember that always here, mission has been hand in hand with justice, with justice. The money that this church provides isn't a handout. It does offer a hand up, that is true, but it's really bringing about balance, right? From, as we reckon with the effects of colonialism and racism all over the world. We are constantly redefining how it is we partner with one another and share our resources. You know, one of the things that I know for sure is that the children at Hope Day School and all over Sierra Leone probably still know more about the United States than we here know about Sierra Leone. And one of the things that I've been noodling around in my brain is a notion of cultural humility, which invites me to be truthful. I don't know a lot. I don't know a lot. But I can ask questions, and I can listen deeply, and I can respond to an ask or an offer or an opportunity that comes from people who know exactly what it is they want and they need, particularly if their mission is aligned. The mission here at First Church to support Hope Day School and Hope Day School's mission to educate the children in that neighborhood who might not be able to access an education are aligned under the motto of Hope Day School. Our hope is in God. I'm excited to share what has been. I'm excited to hear what is now. And I'm really excited to learn what you imagine for the future together. Amen.
In your love, make us whole. May we rest in your compassion. Calm the lost, weary soul in the warmth
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
So, make us holy, make us whole, make us kindred. We come to this time of prayer trusting that in praying together, in working together, that we come closer to God and we come closer to one another. In this time, we have the opportunity to pour out our joys and our concerns, knowing that we can hope in a God for whom there is no boundaries. As we gather, I'd like to lift up our relationship with Hope Day School and to celebrate that. It is truly a work of grace to be able to work together and discover again the goodness of God in this relationship. And I want to thank the Sierra Leone ministry team and Valerie for all their work on making this today happen, but also keeping this relationship alive and keeping us all connected to Hope Day School, and therefore drawn deeper into God's love. So I thank the Sierra Leone ministry team. There are a few other celebrations. Susan Daly offers prayers of thanksgiving because her brother had been in the hospital not doing well, but he is recovered and at home and doing well, so we celebrate that. We have some concerns. First of all, I would like to lift up the prayer of concern for Hope Day School. They have suffered many losses this past year, and the most recent one is the chair of their board of governors, Canon Julius Cole, who was running the school up most recently. So we extend our condolences to all the folks at Hope Day School for that great loss. But also in the past year, they've lost Mr. Jennings Wright, Henry Dean, Agatha Cattell, and a security worker. And so we share in your sorrow. Also like to lift up Cindy Reynolds, a long-term member of this congregation who is undergoing treatment for a salivary gland tumor, and Jillian Holt requests prayers for her friend Angela, whose son Robbie just died, and we hold them all in our prayer. Let us pray. God, we come with the longings of our hearts for community, for connection, to share with one another our joys and sorrows, our hopes, our dreams. Hear us as we speak our story and our burdens and our joys. It is truly good and pleasant today to celebrate and worship with Hope Day School. We thank you, God, for your providence that has brought this school into our lives and for the relationships that we have been developing these years. We thank you for all the people that make this relationship possible, for the boards of Hope Day School and for the Sierra Leone ministry team, and for the Williams family especially. We thank you for the ways this connection has changed and deepened and has changed us. And we pray that our hearts continue to be open and guided by your grace, that we may grow as kindred together. God, we pray for our fractured world that has been torn apart by fear, by white supremacy, by greed, by violence. And we pray, oh God, that this world will grow to know that we are kindred, people united in your grace. And we pray, oh God, that we can become your instruments of peace. And in the prayer of St. Francis, we say, where there's hatred, may we sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is despair, hope. And where there is sadness, joy. Heal our hearts that we may see in all we meet our kin. and give us courage to live as though all whom we encounter are our kin. We bring to you those burdens that weigh heavily on our hearts today, remembering especially Angela and Cindy and Hope Day School. And we remember especially Susan Daly's family. And we pray and lift up those that weigh heavily on our hearts, but that we say now silently in our hearts. God, we know you are able. We know that when we put our hope in you, that you empower us to care and to love and to be your instruments of peace in this world. Make us holy, make us whole, make us kindred. We pray this in the name of the one who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
In your love, make us whole. May we rest in your compassion. Calm the lost, weary soul. In the warmth of your love, may your peace fill our hearts. May we know by your grace you console. Make us holy, make us whole.
My name is Jill Williams, and I am chairperson of the Sierra Leone ministry team. We welcome you to remain watching as we continue the celebration of First Church's connection to Sierra Leone and our work with Hope Day School. If you cannot join us at the next hour, you can watch the celebration later in YouTube. Please consider donating towards the continued support of Hope Day School. Donations can be made to Friends of Hope Day School, Sierra Leone Ministry Team. 1. By logging to our website, www.firstchurch1652.org/give. and making payments by credit or debit card. 2, by PayPal. 3, by mailing checks payable to First Church of Christ Farmington at 75 Main Street, Farmington, Connecticut, 06032. You are encouraged to learn more about this ministry on the church's website at firstchurch1652.org. On Facebook, you can like the First Church of Christ congregational page and the Hope Day School Sierra Leone mission page. Our phone number is 860-677-2601. Thank you.
Again, as Jael said, I hope you will remain on this live stream because there is much more to come with history and more connections and more information about Hope Day School and our relationship. Very inspiring videos. I hope you will be a part of that. You know, from one side of the world to the other, we are bound by Christ's love. Helen Keller said, "Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much." I hope you'll consider staying on with this live stream because that is part of the way that we can begin to do so much together, is to learn about one another. And to celebrate our common kinship. And in doing so, we will sing out the breadth, depth, and height of Christ's love, the grace of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit. Thanks be to God.
Vessels holy and whole, broken, needing the one, open, body and soul, healer come.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back, those of you or continuing on here for this live stream second hour, or if you're just joining us, thrilled to have you. Valerie Tutson is my name, and I loved hearing that song that the children were singing. Tell 'em, Tanky, tell 'em, tell Papa God Tanky. I had the opportunity to travel to Sierra Leone in 2003, so shortly after the war, and one of the things that struck me was that everybody was singing that song, even as they shared stories about how the war had impacted their lives, which seemed to me to be so brutal and so painful and in many ways so unbelievable to someone like me who grew up pretty privileged in Connecticut here on the East Coast of the United States. I didn't know personally what it would have been like to live through a war. And yet I love stories, and the stories of our own history and the stories that I've listened to of people around the world bring the humanity of the experience to my heart and my soul. And it becomes part of what I want to share with other people. So I was asked to tell a bit about the war in Sierra Leone and a reconnection story. But I already told you I'm not a historian. So how does a non-historian talk about war except through story and through stories of real people? I want to thank Jael for generously sharing her story with me. And may I have permission to share it as best I can? Do I have your permission? Thank you. And you may chastise me, correct me, whatever you need to do later. But know that this is coming from my heart, and I'm so grateful. We know that as long as stories are told, nothing ever dies. So here's a story for you that starts on a June day in 1997 in Freetown, Sierra Leone. By the time the boat pulled into the harbor and she got a good look at it, her heart sank. This was not a passenger ship at all. This was a tugboat, one of those boats that was designed to move the bigger ships in and out of the harbor. And Jael wondered how in the world she and her children, not to mention the other hundreds of people who had gathered around in that space on that day, awaiting for a ship to take them out of Freetown to the safety of the Gambia, how could they get on board that ship? They had been there since 6 o'clock in the morning, and now it was 8 o'clock at night. And over the course of the day, more and more people had come into the place waiting to try to get out of Freetown. And many of the people around her, taking a look at that tugboat there in the harbor, turned around and left. And Jael herself was wondering, do we dare get on this boat? Should we turn around and go back home too? But it was her children who looked at her and said, Mommy, we've been here all day. And if we go back home now, and if the army were to come tomorrow, you would regret it. Jael looked at her children and she looked at the hills nearby. And she remembered her favorite psalm, Psalm 121. I will lift mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my strength. My strength cometh from the Lord. Those hills over there had inspired the name of Sierra Leone when the very first European who made his way into the harbor in the 1400s, a Portuguese explorer by the name of Pedro de Cinto, saw those hills. He called them Sierra Leones, Lion Mountains, and they had been home to Jael and her family. She looked at them, she gathered strength, and she said, all right, let's go. Of course, it wasn't as easy as all of that, because there were nearly 600 people pushing and shoving, trying to get on board that ship, and you had to beware of the pickpockets around, and you had to beware of those who were pushing and shoving here and there, and it took another 2 hours or so before they finally made their way onto the ship there, having paid $260 per person, 7 months salary, if you can imagine, to find themselves not even able to get into a place where there was covering from the elements. Instead, they managed to find a bit of a corner on the deck, and they put their backpacks down and they sat on them, and they did the best they could to settle in to rest for the night. If you can sleep sitting on a backpack with everybody around you, knowing that any movement you made would jostle all the other hundreds of people around. When she settled down for the night, gave a little moment to reflect on how in the world they found themselves in this place at this time. May 25th, barely a month before, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the machine guns had gone off in the city of Freetown, and they did not stop. And soon the news came that the rebels and the army had joined forces together, and they had a coup. They were desperately trying to oust Shaka Stevens from the grip of power that he had been holding since 1967. He had already made it impossible for there to be more than another party than his own in power. And people were frustrated, not just in the city, not just all over Sierra Leone, but in nearby neighboring countries. It was a disaster. The fighting had been going on for years, but now it had come into Freetown. As soon as the army and the rebels came into the town, the first thing they had done was go over to the prison and let the prisoners loose. Buildings were being burned. It was terrifying. Everybody tried to stay under the radar. Civil disobedience. Nobody wanted to go to work because you didn't want to show support for the army or the rebels. People tried their best to keep a low profile, but it was not safe. Everything that they'd been hearing from people who'd been streaming into Freetown for years was now at their doorsteps and all around. The day before, jail had heard that there might be a boat coming into town, one that would take people to the Gambia. You see, as soon as the rebels arrived, anybody who had money or the papers in hand got out of the country as quickly as they could. And now jail was thinking maybe they needed to get out of town as well. She spent all day trying to get information and couldn't find it, but around 10 o'clock that night, got a call saying the boat would be in the harbor the next day. So she and her husband and children sat up late into the night, and it was decided that she and the children would go, leaving her husband at home. It wouldn't be good to leave the house empty with all the rioters and looting that was happening in the city. They packed only backpacks. I mean, they didn't expect to be gone too long. Backpacks and a little bit so they could go. They didn't sleep much, and they made their way to the harbor. All day long, they waited, and finally, they were on the ship, and finally, they were on their way. It was not an easy journey, as you can imagine. What should have been only about 1 day turned into 4 days. The children, over time, would roam around the ship, but the adults stayed huddled together around a radio, trying to catch whatever news they could. And they learned that things were very bad in Freetown. And the children were giving the information about what was happening on the ship. There was only one engine that worked. And they said the captain didn't know how to read a compass and didn't know how to get to the Gambia. And in the course of their journey, it rained. A horrible storm with no covering. And soon 2 to 3 inches on the floor of that tugboat. And of course, in their haste to leave, they hadn't packed any food. I mean, they were thinking they'd be on a passenger ship where you could buy the food that you needed. They'd had a little bit of bread made out of cake flour. It just sort of crumbled, and they'd tossed the crumbs to the fish. If only they'd kept a little. Midnight on the second day, the storm was so fierce, the waves were coming over the edges of the ship. Jael held on to her faith. The Lord will not leave me or forsake me. And in the midst of that storm, everybody started to pray in whatever prayers they had. The Muslims prayed, the Christians prayed, everyone called upon God. After 4 days, they learned that they were just off the shore of the port in Gambia. They were excited, thinking that they could get off the ship, but no, it wasn't going to be that easy. The International Red Cross was there, and they sent some people on board the ship, and they let everybody know that if you had a sponsor in the Gambia, you could get off first. If you didn't, you would need to wait your turn. But at least they had brought great big loaves of Italian bread, and they sliced them, and they filled them with meat. Oh, what a feast it was, a blessing to break bread there on that ship. God will not leave me or forsake me. Jael's family had the name of somebody in the Gambia who had offered them a place to stay. And so they were able to get off that ship and into a small boat with about 20 people to make their way to the shore. And when that little boat arrived there on the dock right by the shore in Gambia, and Jael and her children came out, she saw a great big smiling face of a man that she knew. This man was a judge. His name was Dayende Robin Croker. And he had been in Sierra Leone. He had been appointed to the high court in the Gambia. And when she saw him, he had such a big smile of welcome. He had come to pick her and her children and as many others as he could to take them back to his home. When Jael and her children got to Dayende's home, the first thing they did was wash their clothes to try to get rid of the stench from that horrible place on that ship. And then they noticed that the place was very full of people who had also made it to the Gambia. Why, the home was so full that the justice himself went and stayed in a hotel. And he told them to make themselves at home. In fact, he provided all the food, everything they needed for an entire month. After 2 weeks in, it was time to register with the Red Cross, to let them know that they were seeking asylum, that they were refugees from home. They needed to say that they had left their place. And when Jael went, she was given a half a pint of oil and a few cups of rice. Not an awful lot of food. But as everybody went and registered and brought their resources back, at least they could contribute to the feeding of the people there. Truthfully, they didn't think they were going to be there that long to begin with. That's why they only packed a backpack with an extra change of clothes. 2 weeks. But after 2 weeks and a month and 2 months and 3 months, it became clear that going home would not happen anytime soon. Many of the people who were there at the justice's home recognized this, and they rented homes in the Gambia. Jael and her family and a couple of other families stayed in that place. And there were about 5 or 6 girls, and Jael was put in charge of the home. She was the matron of the home. Made sure those girls did what they were supposed to do, made sure everybody did what they were supposed to do. She took care of the budget, and she also helped the justice with his work. She was an excellent typist, having been a fine secretary back home. She was phenomenal at her job. And the justice had only one rule. You must go to church on Sundays. Well, that was a wonderful rule and solace for Jael and her children. A hope, faithful center, and friends as those months wore on and a year came around. It was time to go and see the Red Cross again. And Jael went. She waited all day to have her turn before somebody who was going to be asking her questions. And when she went in and sat down, the man asked her why it was she had left her home. And she explained about the people in her neighborhood, the lawyer and the politicians, and that she knew the man who was the head of the army who had joined the rebels, and she didn't feel safe. She didn't want to appear to be on anybody's side. This was one of the dangers for people in that place at this time. The man listened to her story, and he pulled out a map and he pointed right to it. "You live here." He knew everything that she was saying. And he also said, "If you are lying, we will find out." And then he closed up all the papers, closed up everything, dismissed her, told her the decision would be made and she should come back in a month. It was like sitting for your exams and waiting for those results to come back. In 1 month's time, jail received word that their application to leave for asylum, to not have to go back home, had been accepted. It might have helped that there were children, family already overseas in the U.S. Nevertheless, they were on their way. And it was bittersweet in June of 1998 when Jael and her children said goodbye to the justice. He drove them to the bus stop where they climbed on board the bus to Senegal. And when they got to Senegal, they got on a plane. They were leaving the rainy season behind. They knew only that they were going to the U.S., Connecticut. They were dressed in winter coats because the rainy season there in Sierra Leone and that time of year is winter in sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's much better to wear your coat so that you don't have to pay for extra luggage fees, and that way it'll stay nice on the journey as well. They landed in New York at JFK and were put on a plane to Bradley Airport. And when they arrived in Bradley, they were met by the refugee resettlement team from this very church right here. The women had gathered themselves together and they had gotten there early and they had baseball caps on and they provided a warm, warm welcome for Jael and her children. And they climbed into the back of their car and they made their way to Farmington. And as Jael looked out of the window of the car, she noticed that there were a lot of trees in Connecticut. And seeing all those trees reminded her of Sierra Leone, reminded her of home. And here she was to make a new home. Tell tanky, tell Papa God tanky, tell tanky, tell Papa God tanky. Now we're going to hear some of the remembrances from some of the women who were there at the airport to welcome Jael to this place here in Connecticut.
most vivid memory, Sarah, is going to the airport and watching them come off the airplane. And I mean, it is just an incredible moment. And you don't know what to say almost. It's so emotional. And then we drove from the airport and we went to Aunt Carrie's house and we had a dinner. And I remember thinking, because it wasn't the first resettlement family, that I'd been involved with, that, whoa, this is going to be easy. You just knew. I mean, they were from the beginning, just incredible, strong. I don't know. I just thought I felt almost honored to be part of bringing them to the United States.
We went up there, and the flight, they had this puddle jumper, this Continental puddle jumper. It was actually an actual plane that went from JFK to Bradley. And the trouble was that sometimes it didn't go. So their flight came in sometime in the afternoon, and that flight was canceled. So we waited around. I don't remember what we did, but we decided not to go home. Do you remember this? And then
I do.
Yeah, I think it came in like after 10 o'clock at night. And, so we had called Aunt Carrie and let her know we're going to be delayed. And they came off. And do you remember what time of year it was? I think they were wearing winter jackets.
I think it was the winter.
Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to feel so cold landing here, coming from, where were they coming from? They came in jail, and the two kids, Harriet and Henderson. And they spoke English, number one.
Yeah, that's true.
So it was like, hooray. We knew that, right? But, our experience with the Bosnians, which was the only one I was involved with, was that, English was a big stumbling block.
Right.
But,
Right.
and we had to have translators. Here we didn't need translators. And then we had, wonderful Ann Carey opened up her home. And, I just remember going there, and we had prepared food ahead of time.
Yes.
That would keep, and having, at 11 o'clock at night. And I remember she called Victor, her son, who at that point was graduating from Harvard with an MBA and a sign-on bonus with a New York finance firm. And I'm thinking, the contrast between I thought they came from a refugee camp. They didn't actually. They came from a private home, of friends in Gambia. Having two sons already living in the States, one working for the Gap out in San Francisco, and this one with an MBA. And I thought, are these refugees? But they had fled, Sierra Leone because jail was so worried especially about Harriet, because she was a young girl, and also Henderson, that he might be co-opted into the Civil War. So it was a very different refugee experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually the easiest one that we ever had at First
easy.
Church.
Right.
And you're right, Jane, the fact that they spoke English and were so incredibly well educated.
Culturally, there was very little adjustment.
I think being Black in the United States, is like, I mean, she was in that family were really well educated in the upper echelons of society.
Right.
And then, we know about systemic racism in this country, and that was not easy.
The benefit, the dividend of this whole thing was that Jael stayed a member of the church because she felt at home there, and then the church got involved with its retro, history of supporting someone from Sierra Leone.
They're the only refugee family that's ever stayed with us, continued to be in the community and in the church. And I loved it. We would have potlucks when we used to have all those potlucks, and she'd bring her plantons. I'm really happy that, they've been part of our church. I think big contribution.
Yeah, a success story, right?
After the Civil War, immediately after the Civil War, I put out requests to many institutions, both abroad, mainly overseas, in the UK, in the United States, so on, because of the devastation of most of the infrastructure, particularly the university infrastructure was damaged, considerably damaged by the rebels during the war. So I made requests primarily or initially for Forbe College, which the University of Sierra Leone, I was president of the university at the time. So I made requests for assistance for the infrastructure and for teaching materials, etc. And among the places, among the people I contacted was my sister. She was then in Farmington. She had just gone to Farmington with her family. So I contacted her, and she, I believe, contacted the church, so which she was then a member, or now a member. And that was how it all started. And I started receiving support for the college through this appeal. The response was very positive, and I received quite a lot of support in the form of computers, library materials, and other teaching materials. And all these were shipped to Sierra Leone in sea containers, 40-foot sea containers. That was how the relationship with the university started. But then I was also receiving a lot of other items which were not particularly useful to the university, but useful to other bodies outside the university. So we started donating these outside the university, particularly to schools, etc. And Hope Day School benefited also from these donations. So that was how it started. But that is not my initial contact with Hope Day School. I attended Hope Day School myself. Maybe I was about 2 or 3 years of age, I think. My parents just took me there because we were living close to the school. So I knew the school as an infant, and spent, as I say, some time there. And then I moved to a proper school. So that was how the school, I think that was how the school started. But it was occupied, it was housed in a dwelling house, an old dwelling house. And I think that we used to sit around in the sitting room. It was like a preschool, like a nursery at the time. But when I left and moved on to university and I was abroad, the school slowly developed to a school, but still occupying this old, dilapidated family house, wooden house. It was not even fit for purpose, I would say. So on my return to Sierra Leone from my studies in the UK, my parents told this old lady who was running the school, she was then very old, told her that I was back and that I was now a doctor and a professor. And the lady was very, very pleased to hear that. So she invited me. She wanted to see me because she hadn't seen me for, I don't know, for several decades. One, she wanted to see me. She wanted me to share my experience with her over the years, and invited me to a Thanksgiving service the school was having. I sat there at the back of the church watching the children, and some of them were doing all sorts of mischief, pulling their friends, and so on. So I became very emotional. I said, oh, maybe that was how I was behaving as well as a kid in the school. So after the service, the lady asked me to be a member of the board of the school. I said, board? I said, okay. I attended their first board meeting. It was just a few old men sitting around. That was the board. It was not a proper board. It was just, and I said, well, is this the board? And he said, oh, yes. And that was my involvement, how my involvement with the school started but I got them later to get a proper board and so on. And, as I said earlier, the building, the school was housed in an old, dilapidated wooden house with not too many children, maybe about 20, 30 or so. And the teachers were not properly trained teachers. These were retired people who lived in the surrounding and thought that, well, we'll just use this to occupy our time. And they were the teachers. They're not qualified teachers. And that was what I met. And so I told them at the board that, well, I mean, this is not a proper school. We need to have a proper school. And my initial idea was to approach government authorities to see if they can provide accommodation. Well, not accommodation, but can provide an area where we can have a proper school. Of course, this was very difficult. There was no space available. And in any case, the board did not want the school to move from that location, because the original idea when the old lady set up the school was to service the children in that area. It's a very deprived area. So I agreed with them. When the members of the Sierra Leone, the task force, which is now the Sierra Leone ministry team, when they visited, they paid a visit to Sierra Leone, my sister Jill, a few others, including Marilyn. They visited, and I took them to the school to say, well, to show them some of the places they have been providing all the support for, at least in terms of books and so on. So I said, well, go and have a look at the school. So when they saw the school, they were appalled when I said, well, this is the school. So they said, what are your plans? I said, well, I plan to have a proper school building here, this site. But it was some family property. It was not the property of the school. The school didn't own the land. It was just some family house. So I was given a challenge by the task force, Marilyn, Jill, and others. And they said, well, if your board can purchase the land so that it becomes the property of Hope Day School, then we are going to provide, or at least see how best we can provide funds to construct a building, a new building. So I said, fine. I took up the challenge and contacted some of my friends, many people, including what I can provide together with my wife and others. And I was able to raise the money to purchase that. So I negotiated, we got somebody to negotiate, a lawyer negotiated with the family, the owners of the property, and they sold it to us. So it became a property. So we got a lawyer to draw up all the papers and et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote back to Farmington and said, well, we now own this piece of land. Now, I have done my part, so let's see what you can do. And they said, fine. And they also raised money in the US, and we were able to put up the building, this new building. We got an architect to do the drawings. We got the American embassy involved because I asked them to be sending the funds to the American embassy in Freetown. The reason being, sometimes monies are sent for and the monies are misused. So I didn't want that kind of situation. So I say, pay all money, send it to the United States Embassy. The United States ambassador appointed somebody who was one of the embassy staff to be supervising and looking at things. So that was it. They administered the funds And the building, we put up the building. And the church visited the school. They made another visit to the school. Joel, Marilyn, Reverend Ted Edwards, and a few others. They all visited Sierra Leone. And I got the university to host them. So they were hosted by the university. The university provided their transportation, etc., whatever, all their requirements, because they have been supporting the university, so I got the university to support them. Then, as soon as the new building was consecrated, we opened this building, everybody was there, even the president of Sierra Leone sent a representative to the opening ceremony. He was very, very impressed. The American ambassador was there with his wife and some other members of the U.S. Embassy staff. It was a very grand occasion. The school was open. And then my next challenge was to get proper teachers, trained teachers. But because we didn't have the kind of monies to pay the salaries of trained teachers, it was a bit difficult. But again, the first church, or the Sierra Leone task force, as it was then, came to our aid, and they started giving us subsidy. So we were able to recruit qualified, trained teachers. And then for some of the teachers, the long-serving teachers, we sponsored them to go to colleges, to teacher training colleges, to get the requisite qualifications as a teacher. So now we have all our teachers are well qualified. That, of course, saw an influx of pupils. School parents were all rushing to send their children to the school because the school was doing very well. The school building is up. The school is up and running. Good qualified teachers who are producing. The pupils are doing very well. They are performing excellently. Many of them are now in universities. Some have completed universities and so on.
I want to use this opportunity to reflect on the work of the First Church of Christ in Connecticut, USA, as they celebrate Sierra Leone Sunday. First Church had been of immense help to the Hope Day Primary School. I will remiss in duties if I fail to mention some of the pioneers of this school and acknowledge their effort towards this school. The late Madam Polly Inks, Madam Marilyn Ostriker, Madam Jill Williams, to name but a few. We appreciate the efforts of our very own compatriots here in Sierra Leone, Professor Victor Strasaki, not forgetting those who have gone before the great beyond, Mr. Henry Dean, Mr. J.A.B. Wright, Canon B.J. Keru, and Mr. J.A. Keru. We shall forever be grateful to them for their immense contribution to this school and to humanity as a whole. May they continue to rest in peace. As a school, we are forever grateful to the First Church in Farmington, Connecticut, and we always hold you dear in our hearts. And we pray that God will continue to bless and provide for you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
So
morning, school. I am Marion Sise, the head girl of this school. I want to thank the clergy of officer of the First Church of Christ, Farmington, USA, for recognizing us as your celebrate Sierra Leone Sunday. On behalf of my colleagues, people, we appreciate your efforts toward our school and we say a big thanks to you. Continue to remember us in your prayer, as we also do here, for God to protect us from COVID-19. Thank you once more, and God bless you.
I started attending this school when I was 3 years old, 2009. I was in nursery 1. I had a great teacher, Auntie Coca. She was my mother, my best friend, my auntie. She was everything to me by that time. I was so grateful for her and the school as a whole. I benefited from this school a lot because they impacted knowledge in me and I got a lot from it. I'm now attending the Providence International High School, all thanks to the school I attended first. Because of great hard work, I received scholarship when I was in class 4. Scholarship was from class 4 to class 6. And I hope you guys too will continue the same hard work to achieve what I achieved. Study hard and be successful. It's all thanks to my great head teacher that I'm now here standing and be what I am today, and because of the school. My teachers were my friends, my consolers. They were everything to me. And I love them so much. I love the school as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My brother, who was president of the university, Fairby College at that time, sent me a letter, asking me whether I could find, people or institutions or, how they can get funding or donations to assist the college, which had been vandalized by the rebels, 2 or 3 times. And by then, Marilyn had introduced me to the Women's Spirituality Committee and I became a member. So they were the first people that I shared the letter with. Straight away, they said, well, I think we should form a committee to look into this. And that's how the Sierra Leone Task Force, that was the original name of the ministry team. That's how it started. And we thought we'd just get a few items of clothing or maybe 1 or 2 computers or that kind of thing. But then suddenly we are getting so much. And I was surprised when Marilyn called me one day to say, oh, I found a company, not in Connecticut, somewhere else, and they are disposing of like 120 computers. And, they say, if we want them, we can have them. So that's it. And then again, Marilyn found another company which paid for the shipments of those computers to Connecticut. And we found a warehouse in New Haven, to start storing the things. So as we were getting supplies or items, clothing, books, by that time we could take anything we could take. So we stored them in the warehouse, and at a point, when we had a full load, we contacted a shipper. They sent the shipping container, and we had only 2 hours to load it, and a lot of the task force members were there to help to load the container. Those first shipments went to Fairby College because it was Fairby College that had contacted me to ask for help. But in the process, we got items for primary schools, which were not needed by the college. But as I said, anything we got, we sent. We got clothing for the displaced camps, we got items for hospitals, and we got most of the items we got were for Fairby College. But as I said, we got some items of primary schools, which we sent, with the container, and told Victor, you can, give, whoever needed them. And I think because, he was involved with Hope Day School, because he was in the board, and it's a school that he had attended, and, they really were not being supported by the government. It was a private school, and it's not private that they are paying, a lot of fees. It's private in the sense that it's a school founded by a woman in a neighborhood community. And so it wasn't a high-paying school or anything like that. So Victor donated those items to the school. So after a while, we thought we should go to Sierra Leone, because by then we had sent like 4 or 5 containers, loaded with all kinds of things, crutches and, medical supplies, you name it, we took it. So we went to Sierra Leone, and that delegation comprised Marilyn Ostriker and I, and 4 members of the Sister Cities group in New Haven who were connected with Sierra Leone. So we formed the delegation, and we divided, because of time, because I think we were only going to do a week, Victor divided the itinerary so that the New Haven people would concentrate on the areas that they were already supporting, and our group would concentrate on the areas we were supporting, because by then we had not come together, we are not doing the same projects. So when we went, they asked Victor, there was a day when the New Haven people were supposed to go somewhere else, and we were supposed to go to Hope Day School, which had been receiving the items of primary schools. So, but the New Haven people said, oh no, we are coming with you. So that's how we all went to Hope Day School. And that, for me, that was my second encounter with the school, but my first encounter was years before then. I didn't attend this school, but I lived in the neighborhood and I knew about the school. But in 2004, when we made that delegation, I came to know more about the school and the challenges of the school. And then the school was in just an old colonial wooden dilapidated house. So Victor, Marilyn and the leader of the Sister Cities group spoke, and they decided that if we could contribute 50% each, we could first of all buy the land on which the school was, the building was. So we decided to contribute $5,000 each. But when we came back and Marilyn gave a report of the mission trip and the state of this school, which we had seen, which was not really why we went to Sierra Leone. We went more for Frabe College, but suddenly our focus shifted to Hope Day School because of the state of the school, and we knew how important it was for these children who were disadvantaged to continue an education and in a, in proper environment. So when the church was, deciding on doing renovation and expansion of the meeting house and the Potter Memorial Building, it was decided that a component of that project should be a mission component, and the mission component would be the rebuilding of Hope Day School. So that's how, we took it from there. And since then, we are so blessed that it's been going on very successfully. And within a year from the decision to build the school was built. And in 2007, we went on the second mission trip, and this time it was to open and dedicate Hope Day School. So in that delegation, we had a senior pastor who was Ned Edwards, And this time about 4 members of the ministry team. And then Polly Hinks, was a member of the team, but she couldn't go. But she delegated her nephew, said, "Meet to go with us." And, so since then, and when we got to the school, it was not, it was a joyous occasion, for me going up the hill and knowing what the old building was like and seeing the new building, I was just taken aback. I was transfixed. I stood there and like gaping and oh my goodness, And it was a celebration for the children, for the community, and for us. When we came back, it was decided that we could not build the school and just leave it because everything will go back to where it was. The building was a building, but we needed to make sure that the children enjoyed the facility and got the education that they deserved. And that's how they decided that, we should provide a yearly subsidy to them. And it was decided that the subsidy would be 10,000. And since then, we've been trying every year to generate that money, to send to the school. And we are glad that, we can say the project is successful. The children are doing well. They are having a good education. The teachers are staying. It's not like before when they didn't have, money to pay the teachers and the board members had to pay them from out of their pockets. And this time, it was just different. They had a library, they had solar panels, which had been donated by the Polly Hinks family. They had a library, they had computers, in fact, they had computers. And they took part in extracurricular activities like sports meetings, elocution contests, prize giving ceremonies, and, so it was just better for them. It was a better environment and a better school activities than what it was with not only the church members, we have other people in the community who have helped us. We've had the Rotary Club of Farmington, sometimes not individual members of the church, but families, like Salidera Sando's husband, when he passed, they donated all the equipment in his dental suites to Sierra Leone, and that was acknowledged by the president of Sierra Leone. It's surprising how it has evolved, and I think the other motivation was that we are working with a board, of the school that we trust. Because sometimes when you work with third world countries, you don't have proper feedback of what's happening, how the money is spent, and that kind of thing. But, for the board of Hope Day School, it's been different. We trust them and we could ask for information. They had paid visits to us here in Farmington. They had met the congregation. They had met the Council of Deacons, and so the working relationship, motivates us to carry on. And I must commend them that they don't come and ask for things, just they need something and then they just show that to us. They're always trying to do things themselves, and when we are able, we give them assistance. But the commitment is, the teacher subsidy, and it's not only for the teacher subsidy. Some of it goes to the school, to run the school, to the running of the school, because as we say, the children are in a disadvantaged environment. Some of the parents can't even pay the fees. So they don't always have the fees. So they don't always have money to pay the teachers. I think it's important that we continue with that. The Amisad story is part of the history of First Church. And the First Church is an arm of the United Church of Christ. And when we look at the vision or what the UCC stands for, those things are for justice and love. And I think, when it comes to Hope Day School, in the context of Hope Day School, that love and justice is demonstrated through helping these children to gain an education so that, they are able to hold themselves, at par with children from other countries or in, better, environments. We shouldn't say because they are disadvantaged or they live in a particular location, they should be deprived, of the education that all children should have. And again, having lost contact with Sierra Leone since the Amisad captives went, the story remains with First Church. The history of the Amisad and the story of the Amisad remains with First Church, but contact with Sierra Leone had been lost. So now we have been able to revive this, and I think it's important that we hold on to it. We shouldn't let it go again. Even now, when you talk to people, some people don't know where Sierra Leone is, So our coming here kind of revived the story. So I think, doing the mission work with Hope Day School is a way of not only giving to Hope Day School, but Sierra Leone giving to the people of First Church. And we're trying to do that through pen pal programs, between the children, the church school children and Hope Day School children. And whenever there's something major going on, I try to share it so people know what's happening in the country. And so people knew about the Ebola crisis, the mudslide we had. And now we hear there's another outbreak of Ebola in the neighboring countries. So we are hoping it doesn't jump over to Sierra Leone because they are still trying to cope with COVID. When people ask about Hope Day School and say, what do you think they need? When I tell them they need everything, they don't understand. You might have a football or a tennis ball and it has a hole and you discard it, oh, this is no good, you go get another one. For children of, some children in Sierra Leone, that's so, it's a gem, they get that and, because they don't have a lot.
I'm going to call on a very important personality that attended this school. Presently is at FBC pursuing his law cause. He is nobody but Mr. Abubakar Ba. Let us give him a big hand as he takes over the podium.
Warmly greetings to you all. My name is Abubakar Ba, and I'm a past pupil of this school. Standing here today makes me to reflect and retrospect back in 1996 when I attended this great school. I am currently doing my LLB program at Frabe College, but before that, in 2011 to 2013, I did my diploma in peace and conflict studies, then later on proceeded to do my BA honors in sociology, which I graduated with a first-class honors degree in sociology. Currently, I'm doing my LLB program and I'm in LLB 2, and also I'm doing my MPhil, my master's program. All these thanks and appreciation goes to my teachers at that time who gave me the courage that yes, it is possible and I can do it. So I'm so proud of them, even though at that time there were few teachers, but they stood up to say yes, they can take up the challenge to make sure that we receive all the education that we needed at that particular time. Yes, you guys can do it.
If you are happy for that, wave your hands. Everybody wave. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
When I was in third grade at Noah Wallace in Miss Lydia's class, we had two visitors come to our school. It was Mrs. Kamara and then Mohammed. And they were telling us about their school, the Hope Day School. And Mohammed was saying that not every child in their town was able to go to school. And I just remember being so incredibly upset. I think I went home that day and I asked my mom, I was like, Mom, does every kid in the world get to go to school like I do? And when she said no, I think I just got so upset. I started to just cry and cry. And it just didn't sit well with me. And I was like, I have to do something. I started collecting change. And there was this change jar that we had in my house. So I started just collecting money to try and donate it to these kids, because I ended up seeing that their school was just one room, and that all of the grades and all the students were just all in one room together. And when I was at Noah Wallace, we had a multi-level school. We had different grades on each level. We had multiple classrooms. We had the ability to move around our school rather than it just being, one like room. I believe Miss Lydia also, she ended up bringing some change for me too, in like a jar. While the change was a really big part of the scholarship fund, a lot of it was that I would receive, money from family for like my birthday and for Christmas and things like that. And so whatever money I would get from there, I would put half that money into the fund, and then my parents would then also match that. So whatever I gave from my own money, my parents would also match that. So that was another big part of the fund. As I got more involved with, the fund, and it wasn't just, I'm going to donate money. It was, this is my fund. I know how many kids I'm sending to school. There are other projects at the school that they need, can we put that money there? I have seen the school progress from, a one-room building to a multi-level, structure that has, multiple classrooms, and it's run on, like solar batteries, and they have a well and a playground. I've had textbooks cost more than the tuition to give a kid a uniform and school for a year, and materials and like paper and pencils and their own textbooks. I am very, very lucky. I know that me and everyone else that went through the Farmington school system, we went through one of the top rated systems in the state. That is not a privilege that every kid gets, regardless if it's in the state of Connecticut, in the country, in the world. I know that the system that I went through prepared me for what I needed to do in this world. And to know that there are kids that don't have access to education, period, is such a gut-wrenching, like terrifying feeling that we are failing our next generation. In the American education system, it is illegal to withhold a child from getting education. Like, there are truancy officers. There are, rules set in place by the federal government that a student has to go to school. That is not the same in every country. And the fact that there are kids who want to go to school but can't afford it is, to me, the most gut-wrenching feeling. So to know that you can make a difference in some child's life by just giving your change or by any donation, you can change that child's life. This school and this donation is the first step in them becoming something more than they could ever imagine. This allows them to really follow their dreams, to potentially go to college, to then become a contributing member of society to their society. It doesn't matter if it's to your society, but to the world. It's about the notion of, you don't know what that kid could do. This is the first step in changing someone's life. You have this ability to give that child something that they might not be able to hold, but they'll know in their heart that this is something that they are so excited to have. It just upsets me that there are so many people that don't truly understand that what goes on in the United States, where education is a mandatory thing, that is not the standard practice of the norm everywhere else. It still bothers me that I can't send every kid to school. If I don't accomplish anything else in my life, but to get to that school, that would be enough.
I am a badge of 2008, 2009. But before I came to the school, I was attending another school. But due to lack of seriousness, I became laggard and everything. My sister had to say, no, this is not the kid I know. You know what? I had to send me to another school. I was moved into Obde School. When I came into Obde School, at first I never liked the school because I've left all my friends behind. I know no one. For a girl coming to a new school where she knows no one and she didn't even start there, she didn't even start there class 1 or class 2, so I came here direct class 5. So I was that kind of dull and all. But then I came. Before 2 weeks and all, I was open up, I made new friends. But I was still so very unserious. But some of my teachers stood up and said, "And Daddy, you are such a bright child. We don't know you, but with this short period of time with your first test, we learned that you're such a bright child. And with this, we're not going to allow you to get this whole thing wasted. We're going to put more pressure on you." Then yeah, my whole hell of time started. Mrs. Kamaya on my left, she was on me. Like, no, Ngadi, go to class. Ngadi, study. Ngadi, do this. Ngadi, do that.
But purer and higher and greater we